Camp McCoy, Wisconsin. August 15, 1943. 2:47 p.m. The wooden barracks stretched across the prairie like prison cells carved from American pine. Inside, 847 Japanese prisoners of war sat in silence, their uniforms bearing the stains of defeat. They had been told they would eat soon. What they didn't know was that they were about to witness something that would shatter everything they believed about the war they had just lost. Staff Sergeant William Henderson pushed open the mess hall doors. The hinges creaked against the humid Wisconsin air. Behind him, a line of prisoners shuffled forward, their eyes cast downward in the practiced submission of captured soldiers. But as they entered the long, fluorescent-lit room, something extraordinary happened. The sound hit them first, a low, mechanical humming that seemed to pulse from the walls themselves. Then they saw it. A massive white box, taller than a man, standing against the far wall like some alien monolith. Its surface gleamed under the harsh lights, and from somewhere deep within its metal belly came that strange, rhythmic vibration. The prisoners stopped walking. The line compressed like an accordion. And in that moment of collective confusion, one prisoner, a former Imperial Navy radio operator named Takeshi Yamamoto, whispered the question that would haunt these men for decades. What else had America hidden from the world? The machine was a Kelvinator Model K-19, manufactured in Grand Rapids, Michigan, in 1942. To the American guards, it was simply a refrigerator as common and unremarkable as the wooden chairs or metal spoons. But to the Japanese prisoners filing past it that afternoon, it might as well have been a spacecraft from another planet. They had never seen mechanical refrigeration. They had never imagined that ice could be created at will, that food could be preserved indefinitely in artificial winter, that electricity could bend nature itself to human command. If you're watching this, don't let history be forgotten. What happened in that mess hall wasn't just about technology, it was about the moment when 847 men realized that everything their government had told them about American weakness was a lie. Private First Class Hideo Takahashi had been captured at Guadalcanal after surviving on moldy rice and rainwater for 6 weeks. His stomach had forgotten what fresh food tasted like. His tongue bore the permanent metallic taste of malnutrition. When the mess hall doors opened and he smelled what could only be described as the absence of rot, the clean, cold scent of preserved abundance, his knees nearly buckled. The prisoners were ordered to form a line for their meal. Standard procedure dictated that they would receive the same rations as American soldiers: canned meat, fresh vegetables, white bread, butter, and milk. But the Japanese prisoners couldn't process what they were seeing. The vegetables were crisp. The meat showed no signs of spoilage. The milk was cold, not lukewarm, not sour, but genuinely cold in the middle of a sweltering August afternoon. Yamamoto leaned toward Takahashi and whispered in Japanese, "The food, it's like it was just harvested." Henderson, who had picked up enough Japanese during his 8 months guarding POWs, understood. He walked over to the Kelvinator and, with the casual confidence of a man demonstrating the obvious, pulled open the heavy door. The prisoners gasped. Inside the white cavity, dozens of items sat arranged on wire shelves, blocks of ice that showed no signs of melting, bottles of milk with frost still clinging to their sides, cuts of meat that looked as fresh as if they had been butchered that morning, vegetables that retained the vibrant colors of the harvest. A small light bulb illuminated this temple of preservation, and cold air spilled out like the breath of winter itself. For 37 seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound in that mess hall was the mechanical heartbeat of the compressor cycling on and off, maintaining its perfect artificial climate. Then Prisoner 341, a former kamikaze pilot named Ichiro Sato who had been shot down before his final mission, began to laugh. It started as a quiet chuckle, the kind that emerges when the mind encounters something too absurd to process normally. But it grew into something darker, more desperate. Other prisoners joined him. Soon, a dozen men were laughing with the hollow sound of those who have just realized they have been living inside a lie. Henderson slammed the refrigerator door shut. The laughter stopped immediately. "Back to your meals," he ordered in English. But the damage was done. In the space between the opening and closing of that door, these prisoners had seen more than preserved food. They had seen the future. They had seen a civilization so advanced, so abundant, that it could create winter and summer, preserve the harvest indefinitely, and treat mechanical miracles as mundane necessities. That night, in the privacy of their bunks, the whispers began. "Did you see how easily he opened it?" The light came on by itself. There was no ice delivery. No servants. The machine makes its own cold. If they can do this with food, what else can they do? How many of these machines do they have? Does every American family own one? The questions multiplied faster than the guards could suppress them. Some prisoners began to keep secret diaries, documenting what they had witnessed. These journals, discovered decades later in archives across Japan, revealed the psychological earthquake that struck Camp McCoy that afternoon. Yamamoto wrote, "I have been in the Imperial Navy for 12 years. I have seen our newest battleships, our most advanced aircraft. But this machine in the American mess hall is more sophisticated than anything in the Emperor's fleet. It creates cold from electricity. It preserves life from decay. If this is commonplace for them, what weapons have they built that we cannot even imagine?" The refrigerator became an obsession. Prisoners would volunteer for kitchen duty just to get another glimpse of the machine. They would linger near it during meals, studying its construction, listening to its sounds, trying to understand the principles that allowed it to exist. Some attempted to sketch its appearance in letters to their families, letters that were, of course, censored by American intelligence officers who found the technical descriptions amusing. But Major John Kellerman, the camp's intelligence officer, wasn't amused. He was disturbed. In his weekly report to the War Department, dated August 22, 1943, he wrote, "The introduction of standard refrigeration equipment to the prisoner dining facility has produced an unexpected psychological response. Several prisoners have requested to examine the unit more closely. Others have been observed studying it intently during meal periods. Recommend psychological evaluation to determine if this represents intelligence-gathering behavior or simple technological curiosity." What Kellerman didn't understand was that he was witnessing something far more profound than espionage. He was watching the collapse of an entire worldview. These prisoners had been raised on propaganda that portrayed America as a nation weakened by luxury, made soft by abundance, crippled by individualism. They had been told that Japanese spiritual purity would triumph over American material excess. The refrigerator, this simple, ubiquitous appliance, revealed the propaganda to be not just wrong, but catastrophically, embarrassingly wrong. The machine represented systematic abundance. It implied a supply chain so robust that fresh food could be transported across continents. It suggested an electrical grid so reliable that mechanical refrigeration could operate continuously. It demonstrated a manufacturing capacity so vast that complex appliances could be mass-produced and distributed to military installations in remote locations. Most disturbing of all, it proved that American abundance was not the weakness described in Japanese propaganda, but the foundation of American strength. Private Takahashi began having nightmares. In his dreams, he walked through endless halls filled with humming white boxes, each one containing more food than his entire village had seen in months. He would wake in a cold sweat, the mechanical rhythm still echoing in his ears. In his diary, he wrote, "I dream of the machine's heartbeat. It beats stronger than my own. I think it will outlive us all." The psychological impact spread beyond the mess hall. During their daily exercise periods, prisoners began asking their guards questions about American life. How many refrigerators existed in America? Did ordinary citizens own them? What other machines did Americans use in their daily lives? The guards, most of them farm boys from the Midwest, answered casually, unknowingly delivering intelligence that shattered Japanese assumptions about American society. "Sure, my folks have one back home in Iowa," Private Tommy Morrison told a group of prisoners. "Got it from Sears. Paid $12 a month for 2 years. Ma uses it to keep leftovers, store milk, make ice cream on Sundays." $12 a month. The equivalent of what a Japanese factory worker might earn in 3 months. Paid casually, routinely, for a machine that could preserve the harvest like magic. The economic implications were staggering. But the true revelation came 3 weeks later, during a routine inspection of prisoner mail. Censor Lieutenant Patricia Webb noticed an unusual pattern in the letters being sent to Japan. Dozens of prisoners were attempting to describe the refrigerator to their families, but they lacked the vocabulary to explain mechanical refrigeration to people who had never seen it. One letter, from prisoner 156, read, "Dear Mother, the Americans have a white shrine in their eating hall. When they open its doors, winter lives inside. Food sleeps there without dying. I cannot explain this magic, but it makes me understand why we could not win this war." Another, from prisoner 203. "Honored Father, I have seen the secret of American power. It is not in their weapons or their ships. It is in their ability to make summer and winter exist in the same room, at the same time, whenever they choose. They are not soft from luxury. They are strong because they have learned to control nature itself." Webb forwarded these letters to intelligence headquarters with a note. "Prisoners appear to be experiencing severe psychological disturbance related to exposure to standard American technology. Recommend immediate consultation with psychological warfare specialists." The consultation never came. The war was ending, and American attention was focused on more pressing matters. But in the barracks of Camp McCoy, a quiet revolution continued. Support this work so the truth continues to reach people. The story of these refrigerators reveals something profound about how technology shapes not just our lives, but our understanding of what's possible in the world. Prisoner 67, a former artillery officer named Kenji Nakamura, began conducting informal interviews with his fellow prisoners. He wanted to document their reactions, to understand the psychological mechanism that had transformed grown men into wide-eyed children confronting incomprehensible magic. His notes, discovered in 1987 when his personal effects were donated to the Hoover Institution, provide a remarkable window into the collective mental transformation occurring at Camp McCoy. "Sato still laughs when he sees the machine," Nakamura wrote. "But his laughter has changed. It is no longer the sound of a man encountering something absurd. It is the sound of a man who has realized that absurdity is simply another word for ignorance." The psychological pressure intensified when the prisoners learned that refrigeration was not a wartime innovation, but a technology that had been common in American homes for decades. Guard Morrison, eager to share news from home, showed them a photograph his mother had sent, the family kitchen, with its Frigidaire standing proudly next to the window, as ordinary and unremarkable as a chair or a table. "Ma got this one in '36, Morrison explained cheerfully. "Before that we had an icebox. But this electric one is much better. Keeps things colder, never needs ice delivery. My little sister likes to make popsicles in the freezer compartment." 7 years before these prisoners had ever seen mechanical refrigeration. 7 years before they learned it was possible. American children had been making frozen treats with the casual flick of a switch while the Japanese military was conquering Asia with the conviction that American abundance made Americans weak. The revelation triggered what camp psychiatrist Dr. Sarachan later described as cognitive avalanche disorder, a condition in which multiple fundamental assumptions collapse simultaneously, leaving the mind struggling to reconstruct reality from fragments. Prisoners began questioning everything they had been told about the war. If American families casually owned machines that could control temperature and preserve food indefinitely, what did that suggest about American industrial capacity? About American electrical infrastructure? About American technological sophistication? The refrigerator became a symbol, but it was also a gateway. Through that gateway, prisoners began to see the vast network of abundance that supported American society. The machine required reliable electricity, which meant America had built power grids capable of reaching every home, every farm, every remote military installation. The machine required mass production, which meant American factories were sophisticated enough to manufacture complex appliances by the millions. The machine required continuous maintenance and replacement parts, which meant America had developed service industries that could support technological complexity across an entire continent. Most terrifying of all, the machine was taken for granted. It was so common, so ordinary, that American soldiers treated it with casual indifference. They opened and closed it without ceremony, extracted food without wonder, and discussed its operation with the same tone they might use to describe a pencil or a pair of shoes. Private Takahashi summarized the collective realization in his diary entry dated September 3, 1943. "We have been fighting a war against ghosts. We told ourselves that Americans were soft, weak, dependent on luxury. But luxury requires strength to create. Magic requires power to sustain. We have been defeating ourselves with our own blindness." The psychological transformation was not uniform. Some prisoners retreated into denial, insisting that refrigeration was an isolated example of American technical achievement, not representative of broader capabilities. Others became obsessed with understanding the machine's operation, spending hours listening to its sounds, studying its construction, theorizing about its internal mechanisms. But a third group experienced something more profound, a fundamental shift in their understanding of technological possibility itself. These prisoners began to see the refrigerator not as an American achievement, but as evidence that human beings could reshape the natural world in ways they had never imagined. Yamamoto wrote, "The machine does not just preserve food. It preserves the future. It allows Americans to prepare for tomorrow while living in today. They can harvest abundance when it is available and consume it when it is needed. They have defeated time itself." This insight proved prophetic. The prisoners who grasped the deeper implications of mechanical refrigeration were the ones who, after the war, became leaders in Japan's technological reconstruction. They understood that Japan's defeat was not just military or economic, but conceptual, a failure to imagine the full scope of what technology could achieve. The refrigerator revelations continued throughout the autumn of 1943. Prisoners discovered that different models existed, some larger, some smaller, some with additional features like automatic defrosting or separate freezer compartments. They learned about ice cream, a product that required not just refrigeration but the ability to create temperatures below freezing. They heard about frozen vegetables, frozen meat, frozen prepared meals that could be stored for months and consumed whenever desired. Each new revelation expanded their understanding of American abundance. The country had not just solved the problem of food preservation, it had transformed eating itself into a flexible, controllable process that could be disconnected from the natural rhythms of seasons and harvests. Guard Morrison brought in a Sears catalog from home, thinking the prisoners might enjoy looking at pictures. He had no idea he was providing them with intelligence that would reshape their understanding of American society. Page after page revealed the consumer economy beyond their comprehension. Dozens of refrigerator models in various sizes and price ranges, all marketed to ordinary families as routine purchases. The catalog described features that sounded like science fiction: automatic ice makers, temperature controls, specialized compartments for different types of food, hermetic sealing systems that could maintain freshness for weeks. And all of this was presented not as cutting-edge technology, but as standard consumer goods available for purchase by anyone with a job and a small monthly payment plan. Prisoner 391, a former naval intelligence officer named Hiroshi Tanaka, spent weeks studying the catalog. He made detailed notes about prices, features, and marketing language. His analysis, preserved in camp records, reveals a mind struggling to process economic realities that contradicted everything he had been taught about American society. "The cheapest model costs $159, Tanaka wrote. "This represents approximately 4 months of wages for a Japanese factory worker, but the advertisement suggests it is affordable for American families earning $25 per week. If true, this indicates that American workers earn 5 times more than Japanese workers while having access to technologies that do not exist in Japan at any price." But Tanaka's analysis went deeper. He noted that the catalog treated refrigerators not as luxury items, but as necessities. The marketing language assumed that every family would eventually own one. The variety of models and features suggested a mature market in which consumers could afford to choose between multiple options based on personal preference rather than basic affordability. "This is not the economy of a nation weakened by luxury," Tanaka concluded. "This is the economy of a nation that has made luxury routine." The psychological impact reached its peak in November 1943, when the camp received a visit from a delegation of Swiss Red Cross inspectors. The inspectors were there to ensure that prisoners were being treated according to international law, but their presence provided an unexpected opportunity for the prisoners to get answers from neutral observers. Through interpreters, the prisoners peppered the Swiss delegates with questions about American technology. Were refrigerators really common in American homes? Did ordinary families own automobiles as well? What other machines did Americans use in their daily lives? The delegates, thinking these were harmless cultural curiosities, answered openly and thoroughly. The answers confirmed the prisoners' worst fears. Yes, refrigerators were standard in American homes. Yes, most families owned automobiles. Yes, Americans had access to electric washing machines, vacuum cleaners, radios, phonographs, and dozens of other mechanical conveniences that made daily life easier and more comfortable. But the most disturbing revelation came when one delegate mentioned that American factories were converting refrigerator production lines to manufacture aircraft engines and other military equipment. The same industrial capacity that produced consumer abundance could be rapidly redirected to produce weapons of war. The implication was clear. America had built an economy so productive, so flexible, so technologically sophisticated that it could simultaneously provide unprecedented civilian comfort and overwhelming military power. Japan had bet its future on the assumption that these were mutually exclusive, that a nation focused on material comfort could not also be a formidable military opponent. The refrigerator proved that assumption was not just wrong, but catastrophically wrong. That night, several prisoners experienced what Dr. Chen later described as worldview collapse syndrome. They had spent their entire lives believing in Japanese superiority, in the spiritual strength that would overcome material weakness, in the inevitability of Japanese victory. The refrigerator and everything it represented demolished those beliefs so completely that some prisoners required psychological intervention. Sato, the former kamikaze pilot, was found in his bunk repeating the same phrase over and over. "The machine knows more than the emperor. The machine knows more than the emperor." Takahashi stopped eating for 3 days, unable to consume food that had been preserved by technology he couldn't understand. Yamamoto began writing letters to his family that were so filled with technological descriptions that the censors initially suspected them of containing coded intelligence. But careful analysis revealed they contained only the desperate attempts of a man trying to explain a reality that exceeded the vocabulary of his native language. The camp's psychiatrist, Dr. Chen, was called in to assess the psychological crisis. Her report, filed with the War Department on December 15, 1943, provided the first professional analysis of what would later be recognized as technological shock syndrome. The prisoners are not experiencing simple amazement at American technology, Dr. Chen wrote. They are experiencing the complete collapse of their conceptual framework for understanding industrial civilization. They entered this war believing in Japanese technological and industrial superiority. The refrigerator has not just disproved this belief, it has revealed that their entire understanding of technological possibility was fundamentally limited. Dr. Chen recommended that the prisoners be gradually exposed to additional examples of American technology, under controlled conditions, to help them process the psychological adjustment. Her recommendation was approved, leading to what became known as the McCoy Orientation Program, a systematic effort to help Japanese prisoners understand American industrial society. The program began with simple demonstrations. Guards showed prisoners how electric lights could be controlled with switches. They demonstrated how running water could be delivered to multiple locations simultaneously through a system of pipes. They explained how telephones could carry voices across vast distances instantaneously. But each new revelation only deepened the prisoners' psychological crisis. They were discovering that America had not just achieved mechanical refrigeration, America had mechanized and electrified virtually every aspect of daily life. The refrigerator was not an anomaly, but a representative example of American technological integration. Subscribe so these forbidden stories don't vanish again. What happened at Camp McCoy wasn't just about prisoners of war learning about American technology, it was about human beings confronting the limits of their own imagination. The winter of 1943 to 1944 brought an unexpected development. Several prisoners began requesting permission to work in the camp's maintenance department, claiming they wanted to understand how American technology operated. Camp Commander Colonel Robert Hayes approved the request, thinking that productive work would improve prisoner morale. The prisoners threw themselves into maintenance duties with an intensity that surprised their supervisors. They studied electrical wiring systems, examined plumbing installations, analyzed heating equipment, and peppered their supervisors with technical questions. They were not just learning how to repair American technology, they were trying to understand the principles that made such technology possible. Prisoner 244, an engineer named Akira Suzuki, began keeping detailed technical notes. His journals, discovered decades later, reveal a systematic attempt to reverse engineer American industrial civilization through careful observation of its mechanical components. The electric motor that drives the refrigerator compressor, Suzuki wrote, operates on principles that our engineers understand in theory but have never implemented at scale. The precision of its construction suggests manufacturing capabilities beyond anything I witnessed in Japanese factories. But more significant is the assumption of reliable electrical power. This machine was designed to operate continuously for years without interruption. It assumes an electrical grid so stable, so comprehensive, that any building anywhere in America can be connected to unlimited power. Suzuki's analysis extended beyond individual machines to the systemic infrastructure they required. Refrigerators needed electrical power, which required power plants, transmission lines, and distribution networks. They needed reliable manufacturing, which required precision tooling, quality control systems, and integrated supply chains. They needed consumer markets, which required widespread employment, disposable income, and consumer credit systems. The refrigerator, Suzuki concluded, is not a machine. It is the visible surface of an invisible civilization. This insight proved transformative. Prisoners began to understand that American technological superiority was not based on superior scientific knowledge. Japanese scientists were familiar with the principles of mechanical refrigeration, electrical power generation, and mass production. American superiority was based on superior implementation, the ability to organize human and material resources on a scale that could make advanced technology routine and affordable. The psychological implications were staggering. Japan had entered the war believing that American industrial strength was superficial, impressive in aggregate numbers, but lacking the spiritual foundation that would sustain it under pressure. The refrigerator revealed American industrial strength to be exactly the opposite, so deeply integrated into the fabric of society that it operated automatically, without conscious effort or spiritual commitment. American abundance was not a weakness that could be exploited, but a strength so fundamental that Americans themselves took it for granted. As spring arrived in 1944, the prisoners at Camp McCoy had become accidental anthropologists, studying American technological civilization with the intensity of explorers discovering a new continent. Their observations, preserved in hundreds of letters, diary entries, and official reports, provide a unique perspective on American society during World War II, seen through the eyes of intelligent, educated enemies who had never imagined that such abundance was possible. But their studies were interrupted by devastating news from the Pacific. American forces were advancing rapidly through Japanese territory, supported by weapons and equipment that reflected the same industrial capacity they had observed at Camp McCoy. The refrigerator had been a preview of American military potential, a demonstration of the organizational and technical capabilities that were now being applied to warfare on an unprecedented scale. Prisoner Nakamura wrote, "We have been studying American magic for months, thinking it was curiosity about the enemy. Now we understand it was preparation for the future. The America that built the refrigerator is the America that will rebuild the world after this war ends. We must learn everything we can if we hope to survive in that new world." The prisoners' studies intensified. They requested books on American history, economics, and technology. They asked guards to explain American political and social systems. They tried to understand not just how American technology worked, but how American society had organized itself to create and sustain such technological abundance. The guards, initially suspicious of prisoner interest in American society, gradually began to enjoy their role as informal ambassadors. They brought in newspapers, magazines, photographs from home, and personal stories about American life. Without realizing it, they were providing comprehensive intelligence about American society to some of Japan's most educated and observant military officers. But the intelligence was no longer being gathered for military purposes. By the summer of 1944, most prisoners understood that Japan had already lost the war. Their studies of American technology had convinced them that Japanese military resistance was futile not because of American weapons, but because of the industrial and organizational superiority that made American weapons possible. The refrigerator had taught them that America could produce abundance and military power simultaneously, without choosing between civilian comfort and military strength. This was a capability that Japan had never possessed and could not match. In August 1944, exactly 1 year after their first encounter with the refrigerator, the prisoners at Camp McCoy received news that Japan was considering surrender. The news was not unexpected. Their studies of American industrial capacity had prepared them for Japanese defeat. But it was still psychologically devastating. Prisoner Yamamoto wrote, "We fought for an empire that promised to lead Asia into the modern age. But we did not understand what the modern age would require. America has shown us the future, and in that future, the Empire of Japan is already obsolete." The end of the war brought new challenges for the prisoners. Many would be repatriated to a Japan that had been devastated by American bombing, occupied by American forces, and forced to confront the same technological and industrial realities that the prisoners had been studying at Camp McCoy. But the prisoners had an advantage. They understood American civilization in ways that most Japanese did not. They had seen beyond American military power to the economic and technological foundations that made that power possible. They had learned to think systematically about industrial organization, technological integration, and consumer abundance. When they returned to Japan, many of these former prisoners became leaders in the country's post-war reconstruction. They brought with them not just admiration for American technology, but understanding of the principles that made American abundance possible. They applied these insights to the creation of what would become the Japanese economic miracle of the 1960s and 1970s. But they never forgot the refrigerator at Camp McCoy. In interviews conducted decades later, many former prisoners identified that first encounter with mechanical refrigeration as the moment when they understood that Japan had lost not just a war, but an entire era of human history. Takahashi, speaking in 1987 at the age of 73, said, "Americans think the war ended when the emperor announced surrender. But for us, the war ended the day we saw that white machine creating winter in the middle of summer. We knew then that we had been fighting against the future itself." The refrigerator at Camp McCoy was eventually replaced by newer models, then by more modern equipment, and finally by computerized food service systems that would have seemed even more magical to the prisoners of 1943. The building that housed the mess hall was demolished in 1967 to make way for expanded training facilities. But the psychological impact of that first encounter between Japanese prisoners and American abundance continued to reverberate through history. The former prisoners who returned to Japan carried with them a deep understanding of technological possibility that shaped their approach to post-war reconstruction. Many became engineers, businessmen, and government officials who helped build the modern Japanese economy. They understood that Japan's future depended not on spiritual purity or military conquest, but on the same systematic organization of human and material resources that had made the American refrigerator possible. They had learned, in the most visceral way possible, that abundance was not a sign of weakness but the foundation of strength. The last entry in prisoner Yamamoto's camp diary, dated August 15, 1945, exactly 2 years after his first encounter with the refrigerator, reads simply, "The machine is still humming. It has outlasted the Empire of Japan." Some prisoners said the cold hum of that machine never left their ears even decades later. In their final years, lying in hospital beds in Tokyo and Osaka and Kyoto, they could still hear it, the quiet, mechanical heartbeat of a civilization they had tried to destroy but learned to understand. The sound of the future, arriving one refrigerated meal at a time.